Hey guys, and welcome to another Sasquatch Theory podcast. On this episode, we have Dave from Arkansas, and he has some really terrifying encounters that he wants to share with all of us. I was really excited to speak with another person who has had a lot of encounters and experiences like myself, and especially from the Ozarks. It really makes you wonder if these creatures can mark or tag people, but on another note, a black bear can travel up to 40 miles in one day. I just think it's very intriguing that one hunter can have experiences no matter where he goes in the forest, and the next hunter has never experienced anything in his life. If you have a Bigfoot encounter that you would like to share with me, please contact me sometime, and if you guys can, support the channel in any way possible. I would like to take a moment to thank the viewers and the people who have supported the channel. It really means a lot, and I could not do this without you guys. Alright, with all that being said, let's dive into our next set of Bigfoot encounters from the state of Arkansas. All right, Dave, welcome to Sasquatch Theory. How are you doing today?
Doing well. How are you doing, my friend?
I am doing excellent. Thank you so much for asking. If you would, Dave, tell me a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and your encounters and experiences from the very beginning.
Sure. I reside in a small town called Malvern, Arkansas. It's kind of the armpit of the world. Vowed not to come back to this town, but I had an opportunity, and my dad was starting getting age, and we didn't have such a good relationship. So I ended up moving down here when he started getting sick, and I wouldn't trade the relationship I built with my dad for nothing. I mean, it was a good move, but it put me back in the middle of all my experiences that I've had over the years. My first experience I had was what we call the Saginaw Bottoms here in Arkansas, and my childhood wasn't that great, and it wasn't real safe for me to be at the house when my dad wasn't there. So with that said, that put me, Dad get up, do breakfast. I'd get up, do breakfast with him, and then I would grab my 22, or my shotgun, or my fishing pole, and my tackle box, and I hit the woods. So that not being safe for me at home put me out in the woods a lot. So I hunted, fished, and trapped, all through my childhood and stuff. As soon as I learned how to set a trap, I was setting traps and catching coons and possums, foxes, and whatnot. And that started bringing me up to my first encounter. I think it was about 1976, somewhere right around in there. I think I was about fifth grade or so. And there was a lot that led up to this. I could hear vocalizations. I could hear heavy footsteps. I saw tree breaks. There was just a lot of stuff. And I've spent years in these woods and never have seen anything like this. And I remember talking to my dad about it, and Dad's like, oh, you just, it's probably a bunch of deer, maybe some hogs. And really, we didn't have all that much deer in our area. We did have a few, but they weren't as populated as they are today. And even hogs, so that kind of ruled it out. We don't have any bears around here. I think there's some now, but back then, you never saw a bear or anything. And that's what my dad was telling me. Well, it could have been a bear down there. I said, Daddy, ain't no bear in the woods. And I said, but I'm hearing this stuff and I'm seeing this stuff. And I can remember there for a while that winter, probably in maybe 74, that I started trapping. And I would take my trapping bait. Of course, we were poor, so you had to, improvise, adapt, and overcome. So you just made your own stuff for trap bait. And we had a bunch of like 9 stock ponds in the river. The Washita River was there, and of course, Saginaw Bottoms and the slough and all that kind of stuff. lots of beaver, lots of squirrels, stuff like that. So I'd catch a bunch of perch and I'd stuff them off in a jar, a mason jar, and then I would bury them in the ground in the spring. And by the time trapping season got here, well, they were pretty ripe, to say the least. So I would take these jars and I would take them and put them on my trap lines, and I'd hide them in a hollow log or something like that. But I got to noticing that something started getting into my trapping stuff, my bait that I used. Sometime a jar would be gone. Sometimes the lid would be not untwisted, but like the brass ring would be just, it was like it was pried off and thrown to the side. And then you may find an empty jar there. And I was telling my dad, I said, something down there is getting into my trapping bait. I said, it's tearing the lids off my mason jars. And he still, well, it's a bear, son. It's a bear. And like I said, there's no bears down there. But I remember getting up. It was on a Saturday morning, and Dad had to work that Saturday. So I was up early and headed out the house. I had my single shot 22. I had my tackle box and my fishing bow. And there was a certain place where this spring-fed stream would go into that the backside of the Washita River, down in the slough, that you could catch a lot of perch. I mean, and back then you catch them big hand-sized perch, so they were good eating perch. And so I will frequently, fish that area. But as you got into that area, the stream was like way low, and you had to come up over this brow to get to where it entered to the river back in that slough. And I remember going to that fishing spot that morning, and as I come up over that brow, I'm kind of looking to the side a little bit, because I'm always looking for deer or squirrels or something like that. And when I got about halfway up that, and it's just like maybe 10 feet to where the water is, and the water's kind of deep there, and then it kind of funnels into the backside of the Washita River, and there he was, standing in the water. And as I come up, I just froze. And he saw me and I saw him, and it was kind of like both our mouths were open. It was like a shock. And I remember a sense of overwhelming, just petrified, that freeze type fear. And I couldn't move. My brain's telling me to run, and I can't do anything. My feet are like concrete, cemented to the ground. And he's looking at me, and I'm looking, and it seemed like it was forever, but I know it was just a few seconds. And he was standing in knee-deep water. Now, this didn't look like what I have seen here of late as far as the Sasquatch. Best way I can describe this, it looked like a wild man. It looked like a wild man. It had long hair on it, had like 3 to 4 inch hair on its body. But I remember his hair being a lot longer going across, and his hair was kind of like, it wasn't really like dreadlocks, but it was pretty nasty and stuff. And it kind of hung down in his face. And we're sitting here looking at each other. And now he's almost eye level with me, which would put him probably, I would have to say, at least 8 to 10 feet tall. And we're sitting there looking at each other. Have you ever seen them like them cartoons where something screams real loud and it just kind of blows the person's hair and everything? Mm-hmm. That's what it felt like when this thing finally let out a scream. That scream hit me. It vibrated everything in my body. And when it screamed, of course, 12-year-old kid, I instantly dropped my tackle box and my fishing pole, but I had my 22 rifle in my hand and didn't even think about the 22 rifle. But, that 22 wouldn't have done nothing to that. And I hate to say on your channel, but I instantly wet my britches. I mean, it just happened. It just, there it was. And I'm standing there, froze with, wetting on myself when this thing's screaming at me. And he pulled back his left arm and his hand. And remember, he's standing in knee deep water, but his arms were, when he pulled back and hit that water to splash that water, his hands was, even though he's in knee deep water, his hands were below his knees. And when he hit that water and it splashed up on me and hit my face, that kind of, I'm still in that freeze moment. That kind of, I guess, woke me up, so to speak. And I remember taking flight out of there and running to the house. I don't think I've ever run from the woods down by the river to the house without ever stopping. But I blazed a trail. I blazed a trail out of there. And my dad wasn't home from work yet. And I went to my grandpa and I'm all huffing and puffing. He's like, son, what's wrong with you? Son, what's wrong with you? And my grandpa and me had been talking about it. And he told me what he called it was a haint. So there's a haint down there. And he told me about stories of his encounters with the big guys when he was a tree topper, a young man as a tree topper up in Idaho, when they cut them big trees down and stuff. And there was a couple of stories that he told me, but he called it a haint. He said, boy, there's a haint down there. I've been trying to tell you there's a haint down there. Don't you go back down there in them woods. And I'm like, Grandpa, I said, my fishing pole, tackle box is down there. And I said, go with me. He said, I ain't going down there. And he wouldn't go in them woods, not now that he knew there was a haint down there. And when Dad got home, I told him, of course, he thought I was losing my head, said you saw nothing but a bear down there. And I said, Daddy, I got to go get my fishing pole in my tackle box. And he ended up the next day, Sunday, going down there with me to get my fishing pole and tackle box. And they were there. The tackle box was open. And of course, there was lures scattered, hooks scattered, weights scattered. All of my stuff in my tackle box was scattered all over the place. So I gathered up. We looked for tracks, never found no tracks. Now, prior to this, I did see tracks down there and stuff kind of building up to that. But one thing that I took away from that, I used to coon hunt. I grabbed my dog Jake, a tree and walker, and we'd go coon hunt at night by myself. I was never afraid to be in the woods at night, and after that instance, I automatically became scared of the dark. And you couldn't get me when the sun went down, my tail was in the house. It didn't matter. That sun started going down, I'm heading to the house. And I stayed scared of the dark until I was probably 18 years old. I would still go back out hunting as I got into my teens and stuff, but there had to be, 3 or 4 of my buddies or some of my dad's buddies, because they coon hunted as well. I would go out in the woods with them, but I never went out in the woods by myself anymore. That was out of the question. And so I ended up leaving home about the age of 15 and kind of traveled around quite a bit. And finally ended up, and I'm just going to fast forward a whole bunch, but finally ended up in New Mexico back in the mid 80s, I believe it was, where I started having some more vocalizations. In New Mexico, there's not many trees. There's more just like brushes and stuff, and a lot of mountain area. Once you got to the mountain, then you got to your trees and stuff like that. And it's where I've had several encounters out in New Mexico, and just out there deer hunting, especially when I started bow hunting. And I'd get out there by myself, and out there you just don't sit in a stand. You can't, like here in Arkansas, you throw out a corn feeder and set up in the stand. Out there you hunted. You had to cross the mountains and glass forever and whatnot. And I had several sightings out there, nothing real close, no close encounters, but, a lot of vocalizations, a lot of sightings, from afar off across the canyon or something like that.
If you would, tell me about these vocalizations and the encounters. Tell me what you were doing that day. What happened?
Well, we were out the first time I saw one. We were out. There was a place that I called my lucky hole, and that's where I went to deer hunt. That was the first spot that I hit, because there was always, for probably 5 or 6 years, there was always a buck up there, a nice buck. And this particular morning, they dropped me off, and of course they'd go and hit their areas and stuff, and I'd just call them on the radio, hey, I've got one down, come pick me up, this is where I'm at. But it was a big, huge canyon that I would walk in. And when I first got out of the truck, and the truck was still driving off, so it's making noise and stuff, and I heard the first one vocalize, I heard a scream. And when I heard that scream, it was kind of like a lightning bolt went through my body, because that triggered me all the way back to my first sighting when I was 12 years old. And I almost just said, forget it. But I'm standing there. I've got my, I had a 300 Weatherby Magnum built that was precision. I could knock deer down with 800 yards with this gun. And I'm like, no, I'm going to go up in here, because I can see a long ways, so I know this thing is not going to be close to me. And so I start making my way down the canyon in the bottom, and started working my way up on the left-hand side, going up beside the canyon. So I've got, the bottom of the canyon, and I'm probably a quarter way up from the top. And this sucker is huge, deep canyon. And I'm working up, and then I start hearing rocks kick up on the right-hand side. And so I swung my rifle around, because I figured it was kind of a brushy, and I figured there would be a buck coming out of there. But when I put my scope up, there it was. And all I saw, he was almost all the way up to the top. All I saw was this black figure with long hair, heading up the canyon. And it was just like, there's no way I could run up that canyon. Like, there's no way any human can run. He made ground, and he was up and over, just as fast as like a deer went. This thing was there. I heard the vocalizations first, so I knew there was one in there, but I didn't know where. And by the time I got probably a quarter, three-quarter up that canyon, or about a half up that canyon, he was on that right-hand side, and probably maybe 100 yards from the top of the mountain, from the top of that canyon. And when I was watching him through that scope, I never seen him face, because he was heading out there. When I was watching him, I had a $5,000 size sniper scope on this, so I could zoom in and see a gnat spot. And you could see this one wasn't like the first one I saw. This one was like clean. And I could remember seeing the muscle tone in his legs and in his body as he was running up and getting out of that canyon, but his hair shined. I thought he was silver, but I guess that was what the sun was shining off that black hair, because it was real glossy type. And he made his way up maybe 100 yards, and then he was across the top. I never saw him from the front. All I saw was the backside. Went up there to try to find tracks, but it's real shell rock type stuff up there. The ground's extremely hard, so I couldn't find any tracks there. And there was several instances like that. I'd be up turkey hunting, and you'd hear a whoop while I was turkey hunting, and like when I left New Mexico and come back to Arkansas, and I started encountering these things again, I'm like, especially in the area that I'm at now, my cousin's been hunting down there all of his life and ain't never saw nothing. His dad's been down there. His brother hunts down there. Even my older brother hunts down there. And he'd been hunting down there in that area probably 5 or 6 years before I even got on this hunting lease. And they never saw nothing. But as soon as I get on the lease, it wasn't the first year, but the second year, I had my first encounter down there. And in hearing, when that took place, of course, we got the internet now, and I started, you know, pouring into the internet every sighting, like your show. What is it, Dixie Cripps? I listen to his show a lot, where people write in and tell about their sightings and stuff. And I noticed something uh, that it's kind of like, I'm not saying these things are following me around, which would be impossible, I would think. But, you know, when I had my first encounter, now my brother hunted them woods, my daddy hunted them woods. You know, we all hunted them woods. Nobody ever saw anything but me. When I was out in New Mexico, there's tons of people that would hunt. I mean, we had a big camp and stuff. They never saw any of this stuff, but I did. And now I find on this new hunting lease that I'm on, and I've been out there probably about 5 years now, where I've had most of my encounters up to date. Nobody down there seen anything. Of course, they all think I'm crazy. Daddy said I was crazy when I had my first sighting, but I know these creatures are real because I have seen them face to face. But getting to my Arkansas encounters now, the first encounter I had in Arkansas was I was bow hunting, and I had a stand. It's like 20 feet, 25 feet off the ground, big ladder stand, big comfortable Cadillac is what I call it. And I would park my side-by-side. Of course, back then I had a four-wheeler. I hadn't bought my side-by-side yet, but I parked my side-by-side or my four-wheeler, probably 150 yards down the road. And then I would walk up this old logging road, and there's a clear cut on one side, and then it's all big, heavy pines and hardwoods on the other side. And then I come to this place, and it kind of opens up just a little bit. And then there's a long lane down past that opening that I went up on a pine tree, and I put that big ladder stand up there. And then I had a game feeder. Now we got a lot of hogs, and we do have bear in that area. Not many, but we do have bear. I've only had one experience with a bear for 1 year, and it was a collared bear. I had him on game cams and stuff. So I set my feeder up way high to where the hogs couldn't tear it up and where a bear couldn't set up. So the top of my feeder is about 8.5 feet, because I ended up going back and measuring how high it was. And it was dark. I've got my little light on. I usually point it pretty straight at the ground when I'm walking in there, real quiet. I had my bow with me, and then I had my Glock on my hip, which I always carry a firearm. And when I rounded that corner, I just kind of scanned the area as I was walking in there. And when I scanned past my feeder, I noticed eye shine. And so I just stopped real quick. And then my light started going up. And when I saw those eyes looking around that big pine tree, these eyes were, man, they were like, not as big as baseballs, but in between a baseball and a golf ball. I mean, they were huge, and they were like waist set far apart. And I can't see the whole thing. All I can see is eye shine, because it's standing probably 3 or 4 foot behind my feeder in the tree line there. And I'm looking at this thing, and then all of a sudden that same fear that I felt when I encountered my first one hit me again. And it's like the hairs on the back of my neck and my hairs on my arms started standing up, and I almost went into a panic again. This time, thank God, I didn't wet my britches, but I did later on. I'll tell you about that in a little bit. But I see this thing. I'm identifying what it is. It's something that is very extremely tall, and I'm thinking, okay, this is a Sasquatch. And you know, I've seen tree breaks down there. Hadn't heard any vocalization, but I did find some tree breaks and stuff. And I'm sitting there, and I'm froze in place, and I'm like, my deer stand is probably maybe 25 yards to my left, and my 4x4 is 150 yards back down the road. And I'm weighing this decision as I'm sitting there looking at this eye shot. Now, I didn't hit it directly in the eyes. I put the light down just a little bit, maybe chest high or waist high on this thing. But I could still look up and see the eye shine because I didn't want to hit it in the eyes because I was afraid it would make it mad. And I'm sitting here debating, do I need to run back to my four-wheeler, or do I need to just go to my stand? So I ended up making it to my stand. So I just kind of sidestepped as I'm watching this thing. And I've got my backpack on, I've got my pistol on, I got my bow. So I start making up this ladder, watching. I still got about through the trees, not in his eyes, and I make it all the way up to the stand. And this stand is one of those ladder stands where two people can set up in this stand. And I've got this sucker surrounded with burlap, top and bottom, where the deer can't come up underneath the tree and see my feet or anything. So I get up there and I'm sitting up there in my tree stand. I got my light off. I put my bow to the side. I pull my pistol out and I point it right between my legs. And I was praying. I was like, God, you know what I saw. And I don't want to be no Happy Meal. So, you need to let that sun come up real quick, because it was still dark. The sun hadn't come up. And I sat there, and then I could hear his footsteps underneath my stand. And it tinged the ladder. I don't know if they slapped it or thumped it or whatever. And it tinged the ladder and scared. I was already scared. But when it tinged the ladder, I'm thinking, oh my God, this thing's fixing to come up this ladder at me. And I could hear it walking. You could hear heavy footsteps underneath me. And it's still dark. I got my 40 between my legs, and I got a laser on there. So, all I got to do is hit that laser, and then I've got a 15-round magazine in it. So I'm sitting there praying to God, Lord, don't let this thing eat me. Don't let it, yank me off this tree. I don't want to be a Sasquatch Happy Meal or anything. And I can hear it sniff the air every once in a while. You could hear it, and you could hear it heavy breathing. And it kind of made some tracks around my stand. And then before the sun come up, it just kind of wandered off. And I never saw anything after that. It wasn't until about 3 days I went ahead and hunted. But after that, I didn't go to my stand until the sun was up or barely coming up to where I could visually see what the heck's going on around me. I didn't go back down there in the dark. And I seen something that I went up there, filled up my corn feeder about 3 days later, 2-3 days later, and I was heading out, and I saw a wolf. And I've never seen a wolf in this area, but I've never seen a wolf this big before. This thing took up that whole path, crossing the logging road in front of me down where this little creek is. And his pads were like huge footprints and stuff. And I drove up to where it was and kind of where it crossed and tried to see it, but it was already gone. And I went from there all the way to camp, and I asked my cousin, I said, hey, is there any wolves down here? Have you ever seen any wolves? He's like, boy, you done lost your ever loving mind. Ain't no wolves here. I said, dude, I swore I saw a wolf. There was a wolf that crossed the road in front of me, and from the tip of his nose to his tail, I said it took up the whole road. It's the biggest doggone wolf I've ever seen, and it was silver, kind of a darkish silver. And so I blew that off. Now, that was 3 days later. And of course, I found it odd, too, that hardly anybody killed deer that year. It was the worst year of deer season down there. I talked to one old man down there, Plug, and he said, man, I've been hunting down here since I was a kid, and he's in his late 70s. He said, I've never seen a year where the deer went down here like this, down in the bottoms. And, whether I saw a Sasquatch or whether I saw a dogman, that I don't know. But I know I saw a wolf go across that, and it was too huge. It was too big to be an average wolf. And I've seen some big wolves. I had a buddy of mine that used to raise them things. They're huge, but this would make 2 or 3 of them. And so that was, besides seeing tree breaks when we were out there, I started spending more time in the woods down there, finding tree breaks. There was one tree that I found was out hog hunting. It was probably 10 inches big around and probably 5, 6 foot up. This tree had been twisted. I'm talking twisted. This whole tree was twisted in a section, probably about a foot, foot and a half. This thing was the whole, I mean, it was just one section. It was like something grabbed it, twisted this thing almost all the way around, and then just laid it over. And I've got pictures of that I can send you. But I just kept noticing stuff like that down there. And I had got into another lease that was next to the lease that I was in on, is where it really started picking up. Because I was down on the opposite side of where I was hunting, and I was hunting down in the bottoms. And I started hunting down there, and being a new guy on the lease, you know, you're slim pickings on finding you a spot, because I go out in the woods and I start looking for signs, feeding, where the water and where the trails are and stuff like that. And every time I'd find a good spot, all I had to do is stand there for a little bit and I'd find somebody's stand. So there's stands all over down there. And I ended up going and asking Plug, which he's the president of the lease, or he was at this time. And he said, well, there's a place over here, but there's a place over here on the beaver pond. He said, that would be a good place right there. So I went to the beaver pond and looked that over, and it looked more promising there. Now, I had a few encounters down there by the beaver pond, 3 that I'll share with you. The first one I had, and what I did is I went in, I didn't set up a tree stand or anything like that. I set up a ground blind. And this, where the beaver pond is, some of it has water. Like when in the rainy season here, it fills up, but in the late fall, it kind of sinks a little bit. And there's some kind of plant that grows in that. And when you walk across it, it's like walking across a marsh. I mean, you can hear the water down below you, but you won't get your feet wet, but you can walk across this pond. And so I set up my ground blind, put out a corn feeder, put out some game cams and stuff. And there was some deer and stuff coming in there. But I remember one afternoon I was sitting in that stand and I heard the first vocalization down in that area. And it was like, when I heard it, it was like everything come back. The hair on my neck stood up, and it was like, oh my God. And and I haven't gone fur much past the beaver pond where I planted my ground blind. And it was probably 50 yards. I didn't know it at the time, but there's another creek that runs back there. I found out the next day. But that thing was, I mean, vocalizations a lot, just making weird type sounds, weird type noise. Every once in a while it would whoop, but just crazy sounds. And I could hear it, you know, going down back over there by the creek where I found out the next day. And then it kind of took a right and kind of went in the wood line in front of me, probably 100, 150 yards. And by the time it hit there, it's getting late in the evening. The sun hadn't completely went down, but when it hit there, that's when I just kind of lost it. I mean, fear took over, and it's like, I am getting out of here. So I step out of my ground blind, I zip it up, I've got my gun on ready, you know, and I'm kind of looking around, walking in circles, trying to, you know, get back to my 4-wheeler, which is probably 25, 50 yards down the road. Got on my 4-wheeler and I hauled butt out of there. And I remember going back and telling my wife at the time, I was like, you know, I heard vocalizations down there. I said, there's a squatch down there. I have no doubts. And so I went back to hunting that ground blind the next day, but I went after the sun come up where I could see. And I got in my ground blind. I just sat there and I kept contemplating on what I heard the next day. And I don't know why I didn't pull out my cotton picking iPhone and hit record. I guess I was in too much fear. It didn't even cross my mind until the next day. And I'm like, what, kicking myself in the butt. Why didn't you record those sounds? Because they were long, long. And so I was like, I'm going to go back here and see what I can find. So I texted my wife. She was on another deer stand. I texted her and I said, hey, I'm going on a walking bout. And she said, you're going to go look for that thing. I said, yeah, I'm going to go look and see what I can find back behind me, because I haven't been that far back there yet, because the woods around it's been clear cutted at one time. And then once the clear cut, once they come in there and haul out all the logs and stuff, and all these little trees grow up, but it's so bushy and thick and whatnot, so you can't see very far into the woods. And I told her, I said, if I ain't back in a couple of hours, I said, send a cavalry. She said, okay. So I got my gun, my backpack, and I kind of walked down this little road, logging road, for a little bit, and come to find that creek. And so I'm kind of looking around the creek and whatnot for footprints and stuff like that. And I finally found the footprint, but it was down in the bottom. And I've got a picture of this and then a zoomed in picture of the track. You can tell there was a heavy footed track there. And I'm like, well, I'm going to go down there. And then it just kind of hit me. The thought that hit me is, this is an ambush spot. Don't go down there. This is what I'm hearing in my brain. And I'm kind of froze. So I took my phone out and did a panoramic picture of everything that was around me. And then I zoomed in on the track and took a picture of the track. And then I just kind of went on down and tried to follow where I heard the sounds at and come back up. I never found any. I've only found that one print that was down in the bottom, and it looked like it crossed that creek. And there's a lot of cypress woods down there, and cypress stumps sticking out of the ground and whatnot. And so I followed all down. Then there was a road that went up to the right. I didn't even know that was there. And I got probably about maybe a quarter ways down that road, and that's where I found the tree breaks. And I got photographs of all this. But probably 12, 15 foot in the air, there was a group of trees, probably 3 or 4 of them where the tops had just been, and these ain't dead trees. These are green trees. And the tops were popped out of them, and they were laid neatly across that trail. And I got photographs of all that. And I found that, pretty fascinating. Did the Sasquatch pop these, cover this trail to kind of say, hey, don't be coming down here. So that kind of boogered me up a little bit. And so I continued hunting down there, and it was kind of late in the season. I never heard anything or anything like that. But I did go down there. I kind of, getting cocky, getting a little brave. And so I started going back down there to hunt, because I had a nice buck on the deer cam. Or on my trail cam. And I was like, I got to get that buck. And he was coming in there early in the morning, and right at, a little bit before the sun come up, he would kind of hang around as the sun light enough to shoot. And then he would just exit out and leave. And so that prompted me to get down there and before the sun come up. So I'd go down there about an hour before the sun come up. Well, this morning, it was thunderstorms were moving in. It wasn't raining or anything like this, but thunderstorms were coming in, and it was lightning. When it lightened, the wind was blowing a little bit, but when it lightened, it would turn. You know how lightning turns night into day. I mean, it was a brief few seconds that you can see everything. It's just like noon time, and I'm sitting there in that ground blind. And I hear a stick pop behind me. And I'm like, it kind of like jolted my heart. It was like, oh, kind of scared me. But that's all I heard was that stick. And I'm sitting in my chair, and my ground blind is one of those ones where it has, the dills all around 2 sides. And then it's a camo screen. And then you pull the insides down, you can still see through that screen. A good ways out there, but it's like nobody can see in. So I'm sitting there in that stand. I heard this stick pop behind me. It kind of gave me a shock, and it's lightning. The wind's beginning to pick up and stuff. And then all of a sudden, I get this overwhelming sensation that there's something out there. I'm being watched. The hair back up on my neck starts coming up, and my heart's beating fast. And I'm in that, flight, freeze, or fight mode. And so I'm sitting there, and I'm like, oh, don't let that be a Bigfoot. Don't let that be a Bigfoot. And I'm kind of, getting brave, and I'm looking out. I'm still sitting in my chair, but I'm getting up close to look out to see what I could see, if I could see around the corner of that blind, because the backside there, it has a big window, and that window I had tied up to where they couldn't see me moving through because if you open the backside, then you can see through that stuff, that camouflage stuff. So I always kept the back closed where the door was and the sides were. And I'm leaning over in my chair, and I'm looking to see if I can see around the corner of my hunting blind. And I'm looking, I'm real close, and I almost got my face right up to the deal, and the lightning strikes. Now, this sucker is standing directly behind my stand. This ground blind's probably maybe 5-6 foot off the ground, I guess. And the best I can ascertain, because I saw him sideways, and he's behind me looking over sideways into that blind. And I never knew he was there. And I've got my face right up there. This thing is probably 12 inches from my face, and the lightning strikes. And he sees me, I see him, he screams, I scream. I fell over in my chair, and I was in flight mode, and I'm trying to crawl out the side of my blind where there's no window or anything. I can hear him like a freight train, like plowing, like a diesel or a bulldozer going through the woods. And I'm scraping and trying all I can to rip the side of this blind open. I didn't even think to just go through the door. But I'm trying to get through the side of this blind. And finally, I just fatigued and just gave up, just laid there with my, panting and just terror. I mean, I've been in some high stress situation and gun battles and stuff, but it's never scared me as much as these things have. Done wet my britches again. I mean, I'm fit to be tied, and I finally get up, get my senses together, get on my four-wheeler, and I'm like, I'm never going down there the rest of my life. But eventually I did start going back down there. It's probably a year before I started going down there. And then since then, I've had several encounters. And I've had several encounters there. I ended up sitting on the 640 down there to where this timber hadn't been cut since the 30s. So you've got pine trees, you've got hardwood trees, you've got cypress trees and stuff that are like, 50 foot tall, a lot of bottomland. And people have hunted down there, but they've never stayed hunting down there. And so I take this ground blind from the beaver pond, and then I move it down into the 640, which is not too far where I hunt at now. And I set this ground blind up and get it all set up, get a couple of corn feeders. And then there's a tree that grew up, and it's got this huge limb, probably about the size of a basketball, that just comes out the side of it. And then it turns around and goes straight up. And so what I started doing is I started putting apples up there. And that's what I started at first. And then I ended up putting like 9 game cameras on this little gifting spot, and put some on video, some of them to take pictures. So I'm very convinced they can see infrared now, because and what I couldn't understand was I would take pictures of squirrels, pictures of coon, pictures of deer. Now this log's a little bit high, so it's above the deer's heads. And I would put like bananas, peanut butter, crackers, and apples up there. And I've got pictures of it being loaded, and I've got pictures of it as it slimmed down. I could catch everything on that but what was taking the stuff on there. Or I'd set my game camera up, brand new batteries, and go down there the next day, and they're all dead. There's 9 game cameras sitting up there. Take pictures of birds, squirrels, all that kind of stuff, but never taking a picture of what was taking that. And the fascinating part is it started leaving stuff on that big limb. I would leave some apples, and it would leave an arrowhead, or it would leave. I've got a marble that was there. I've got a piece of. It looks like a light green top glass stuff that was set up there. I think I've got probably 7 or 8 arrowheads that were left up there. So I found that very fascinating. And I remember one time I went down in there, and when I first set the ground blind up there, I noticed that probably 12, 15 foot in a tree up above my ground blind, there was a limb that was busted, and it wasn't busted completely off, but it was broken, just hanging on the tree. I've got pictures of that. And I had one, I got off my 4-wheeler and I walked in, and I had that sense again that I was overwhelming feeling that there's something around me. I'm being watched, whatever you want to call it. And I went ahead and went into my ground blind and kind of sat there. And there's a big blowed down tree that's probably about 30 yards from behind my stand. And of course, it's dark out there. And I kind of opened the backside of my deal down a little bit and was looking, and I could see a set of eyes in between the tree that had been fell over. The only thing I could figure is it was laying down with them trees, looking through the cracks of those trees at me. And I'm like, okay, sun's coming up here in a few minutes. I'm going to get a shot of you. And by the time the sun come up, probably 20, 30 minutes, it was light enough to see out there. That sucker was gone. And then it was a few weeks after that is when, and I've got a picture of this too, there was a yellow plastic jar with a lid on it. It had a little bit of dirt in it. And I'm sitting here in my ground blind, and this thing comes flying through the air, hits my ground blind, and bounces off. And it's laying there probably 5 foot from my ground. And I'm thinking, what the heck? So I pull out my phone and I'm taking pictures of this, and I'm thinking, okay, now if one of these rascals threw that, of course it was a stormy day that day. I said, one of these rascals threw that, maybe I can get some DNA off of it. Because I did a Bigfoot conference down in Falk, Arkansas, at one of those Bigfoot conferences, and there was a lady there that talked about how to collect DNA off these rascals and whatnot, and she had bags there, and I bought one of these DNA bags that had the gloves and everything like that. And you try not to contaminate it. And I'm like, I've got that back at camp. I'm going to get on my 4-wheeler, and I'm going to head out of here, grab that DNA bag, and come back. And that's what I did. I stopped, made me a sandwich at the RV, ate it, and then I went back down there. By the time I got down there, it was pouring down rain. And I'm thinking, oh, man, that's going to wash away all the DNA. But when I got back down there, the jar was gone. It wasn't where it was. And then on that particular stand, there was another tree break that my wife at the time found. And she pointed it out. And I've got a picture of me pointing up. And the thing about it was the tree, the first thing I do is when I see a tree break, I look up, what's happened to the trees around it? Can this, was this just the wind? I try to, do the pros and cons, eliminate, because I'm pretty skeptical, and I try to, dwindle it down to where there's no explanation in my mind anyways. But that tree was broke off probably 10, 12 foot up in the air, and it was probably about as big as my fist, but the top of the tree was nowhere to be found. Now, if the wind blew that, it must have sucked it on out of there. But this tree, you got trees 50 foot above this tree. There was no plausible explanation of, number one, how this tree broke, and two, where did the top go? Because usually if the wind breaks a tree, it's laying right there beside it, but the top of the tree was completely gone. And there was a lot of stuff that I saw on the 640. I remember going down to find actually where I put this stand out. Now, this was early in the year before deer season, and I was in there reconning all this area, and I kept the 640 has thickets on both sides that have been cut and growed up, and so I'm going down this 640 on my four-wheeler, and I start seeing the shadows out of my peripheral vision, of movement on both sides of that four-wheeler, and it followed me all the way down to where I put this stand. But if you'd look, it would be like, you turned around and look, you couldn't see anything there. But I know that there was something standing there, whether it stepped in the thicket or whatever. These animals are extraordinary. But I found a stick, probably bigger around my arm. My arm, I would like to say it was pretty good size. But a stick that was shoved down into the ground, and of course, first thing I do is I look up, is there a broken stick or a broken limb up above my head? And I didn't find one. And I kept going, and I found another one, probably 30 yards, the same thing. It was shoved in the ground. And I kept going. I found it all. I took pictures of it. And there was another stick that was shoved in the ground. But what I found real interesting is if I got into a certain angle, these sticks lined up perfectly. And so I found the place where I wanted to put my deer stand is where I found the first one, and I ended up coming out. But I found all three of these, took pictures of it and how they lined up and everything. And I kept going, and I come into an area where, have you ever seen the arcs that some of these creatures possibly make? Well, there's a huge tree that's just arced that caught my attention. And so I went in there, and it was like there was arcs everywhere, and there was tree breaks and stuff. And I've got that feeling that I was being watched. And when I have an encounter, I log all this stuff on my iPhone. What the barometric pressure was, how was it cloudy that day, and I start logging it all on my iPhone in my notes. And I remember pulling out that day, and I've got what is that, Onyx app that tells you boundary lines, and it's a hunting app that I use. But I mark my encounters and take pictures and log it into that as well. And it's got a cool little Sasquatch icon in there. So I mark all the Sasquatch locations that I've seen, either seen tracks or whatnot, and tree breaks and whatnot. I take pictures of them and put them in there. So it's a good way for me to keep up with my encounters and stuff. And when I pulled up my Onyx app and was going to mark that spot, and then I pulled up my compass. Now, that was the freaky thing. When I was standing there in the middle of this, and I've got a video of this I can send to you if you want, but I'm standing there in the middle of that area, and my compass is going around in circles where this location was. There was no, usually you pull it out, north is this way, south is this way, east is this way, west is this way. It wasn't like that. That compass started going around, not real fast, but it never kept a magnetic center, which I found real fascinating. But I marked it on my deal in my Onyx app, and then videoed it and went ahead and backed out of there. Then there was one other time that my wife, me and my older brother were down there fishing, and I've got photographs of this, and it was late, And she's like, I'm tired. I'm going back to camp. So she took off on my four-wheeler. Me and my brother's still down there on the river fishing. She took off on the four-wheeler, and all of a sudden she calls me in a panic. And she says, I just seen something. There's tracks on this road. I'm going to camp. I ain't never coming back down here again. And it really boogered her up. So she hauls butt to camp, and she was frantic. So I'm like, okay. I told my brother, I said, let's gather our stuff up. You know, Tracy saw something that's down there on the road. And me and my brother both witnessed this. And I wish I would have took the time and went back to camp, got my plaster of Paris. Of course, everything now I do with dental cast, because you can get more detail out of it. But I put some rocks around the best track. But I do have photographs and video of this. But the tracks were about 14 inches long, and from the tip of the toe to the heel of the next track was 64 inches. So it had a 64 inch, and there was probably 5 or 6 tracks down there. And I'm thinking, it's late. We're out in the middle of the boonies. There's nobody going to be coming down through here. And so I said, I'll go back up there first light and cast these tracks. And went down there, and somebody had run all the way through these tracks. But I did get pictures of it and stuff. So there's been lots of encounters down there. And me and 2 of my buddies, Justin, that called you and kind of told you about some of my encounters and put me in touch with you. We all went out this last weekend, and we were in, I'll tell you exactly where we were. We were at Wright Patman Lake in Atlanta, Texas. And I met a guy down there Justin introduced me to by the name of Steamboat. And he's had several encounters and has sent me video of some encounters down there. And I'm definitely planning a trip back down there. But he sent me this one video of this guy and we went to passed by the guy's house, but his vehicle wasn't there, so we kept going. And but it had a Bigfoot. He's got it on he's got cameras in his backyard underneath the arches of his house. And he said he's got the video, and I can send you this. I mean, it's real fascinating because it's already out there on the internet. But you can see the Bigfoot walk across, broke the cage open. I think he had maybe three pet coons in there, pulled one pet coon out, and turned around and walked back across the frame. That was real cool, real cool. So I definitely want to go back there and kind of poke around back in there. And the guy said we could, so we're going to plan another trip. But we spent 3 days. We spent Friday, Saturday, and Sunday out there. And we had probably about 9:00 Friday night, we had one scream, and it was across the lake from us. And this scream was so loud, it didn't reverberate like it was when I was a kid. But I mean, and the length was what really fascinated me, was the length of the scream. So I'm fumbling through my gear trying to get my phone out, and then I hit record, and at the tail end, or when it got almost to the tail end of the scream, every coyote for miles around just started yelping and stuff. And I got all the coyotes yelping, but I didn't catch any of the scream. You know, you have you don't ever think about the camera. You don't think about recording when you're in the mix of it, but I'm trying to get better prepared now. But I did catch the tail end of them screams. And we did found another tree that was twisted, like that tree that I found down in the bottoms here in Arkansas. And found another tree like that. I got pictures of that. Fascinating. And then we had some tree breaks around camp at night. We had sticks thrown into camp at us, a few rocks, a few pine cones. So we had a lot of activity, but no visuals, which, it always, with me and these critters, it always It always happens with visuals at first. And let me tell you about one more encounter, and then we'll kind of wind this up. Uh, I used to go out there on the river and I'd fish at night, and I would play Southern rock and roll, uh, and I put it on a speaker above my side by side. And me and my dog Christian, she's passed now, but we would go down there and we'd sit out there and fish all night. And you can catch, some pretty good channel cat down there, some flatheads and whatnot. And we were down there one night, and I could hear this hoot owl a long ways off. And I've heard hoot owls all my life, but this hoot owl there was a slight change in the verbiage of this hoot owl. You could tell that it sounded like a hoot owl, but you could definitely tell it wasn't a hoot owl. And then all of a sudden, there was another one, and then there was another one, then there was another one. And I'm sitting in the setting of this, I'm down on the river, and the river goes down at night. It comes back up early morning, and then goes back down when they let the floodgates open. So I've got 15-foot banks on both sides, and I'm down in on a gravel bar, which I found an 18-inch track down there that I've got cast and got pictures of. And I didn't find it. My previous wife found it. And so I started going down there fishing after we'd found and casted that track. And it always seemed between midnight and 4 o'clock is when I found the most activity down there. And I use it's not an infrared light. It's just a red light that you use for hunting at night. And because I found when I'd take my spotlight, when I'd have that feeling that something was around me, I would take my big bright light, and you could see eyes shine, but they'd close their eyes and never open them again. So I ended up finding this light at Walmart for night hunting that you put on your gun, and I took it, and it's pretty powerful. It was only $80, and I could skim it across there, and you could see eye shine, but it didn't. Of course, I never hit them in the face. I always scan low to locate them, and the hoot owls that night kept getting louder and louder. And before I know it, I've got 3 sets of eye shine on one bank on one side of me, and I've got 2 sets of eye shine on the left-hand side of the river. And by this time, my dog, man, from the tip of her tail to the tip of her nose, every bit of her hair down the center, she's on high alert. She's growling. And I'm like, we got 5 of them around us. I was talking to my dog. So that would happen, 2 or 3 times. But this one time I want to get to that really freaked me out. Now I've heard of Bigfoot, the mind speak and the infrasound and stuff like that. I'm not saying that this is what happened. Never had one speak to me. Now I have spoke to them, but I've never had one mind speak to me or anything. But this was just unexplainable. I'm down there, I'm fishing, got my dog with me. We done caught a couple of fish, and it's probably 2:30, 3 o'clock, between 2 and 3 o'clock. And we're down there fishing. And then it was just like, I don't know what happened, but when I woke up, I was face down in the mud, kind of on my stomach. I mean, all I remember, I was sitting in my chair, and then I'm laid out right beside my chair. Don't know what happened. I remember getting up, and I'm kind of looking around, and the next thing I remember, I wake up in my RV back at deer camp, and I'm covered in mud. And I'm like, what? And the last thing I remember is sitting in my chair fishing with my dog. Don't know what happened, but the only thing I can do is ascertain was evidently I got up I gathered all my stuff, put it in the side by side. Usually when I get home, I'll unload my side by side, put my fishing poles up, clean the fish and all this kind of stuff. The fish were in a plastic bag in my freezer on in my RV. I'm covered in mud. I've got mud cake, dried mud caked to the side of my face. I've got mud all in my bed, and I'm thinking, what the heck? And so first thing I do is call out for my dog. She comes back there in the bedroom, and I know she's safe. I get up and I go out to my side by side, and all my fishing gear is packed up in my side by side. And I'm kind of like, what the heck is going on? So I went ahead and made me some coffee and stuff. And I'm like, well, what happened to the fish? So I opened up my ice box and then opened up the freezer, and my fish are in a plastic bag up in the freezer, frozen. And I couldn't tell you how I got home. I remember sitting in the chair. Don't remember getting up any of my gear. Don't remember putting my dog in the side by side. Don't remember driving back to the deer camp, getting in my RV and going to bed. I don't know what happened that night. But the first thing I did was got some coffee in me the next morning, cooked me a little bit of breakfast, and then I headed back down there to see if I could find any tracks or anything like that. Now, this was in June and July back in there. It's pretty swampy and pretty wet down there, but by this time, right before deer season, that mud and stuff just becomes like bricks down there. In fact, of course, the water come up where my camp was, or where I was setting on my RV, or not my RV, but my side by side down on the river. And you couldn't tell where I drove in there. Now you could once you got up on top of the ground, the gravel bar. You could tell I was down in there. You could tell I drove out. But where I was sitting at, the water come up. I couldn't find any tracks. Went up on the bank on one side of the river, looked all back in there. And I remember that night that before I blacked out, I guess there was. I noticed that there was a rock that hit in the water, probably 2 feet from me, and that's when Christian first went on high alert. And I heard something hit the water, and I just kind of looked over and just kind of, went back to fishing and whatnot. And then another one hit almost in the same spot. And Christian has got a low growl. And so I'm sitting there watching that spot. And then another rock drops almost in the same spot. And I'm thinking like my cousin's up there messing with me or something like that. This is before it ever got dark. But it was getting toward where the sun was fixing to go down. And I said, hey, who's up there? And whatever was, I couldn't see because it was back behind the bank. But whatever was up there grabbed a tree. It was about 10 inches around and shook it like a rag doll. I mean, the whole top of that tree was bouncing side to side. There was leaves coming off of it. It never made a noise. It just shook the tree. And then I remember my dog, Christian, she just went off. I mean, she just started barking and showing her teeth and stuff. And then, of course, later on that night, that's what happened to me. So that's probably on this setting. That's probably, there's a lot more I could tell you, go into more detail and whatnot. So I'll probably wrap it up with that.
Okay, Dave, I appreciate you for sharing your encounters and experiences with me. The creature that you saw standing in the water, was this in a creek or a river?
It was if there's a spring-fed creek that comes in and kind of cut all the way across our property. And then how a stream runs into a bigger bank of water. There's the water kind of backs up right there. And that's where he was standing. Almost were probably 10, 12 feet before you actually got to the river. And that's usually where I caught all those big hand-sized perch at, was right in that area there. You didn't have to get in the river. All you had to do is just get right there. It didn't matter if you threw a cricket or a worm or anything, man, them perch would bite right there in that one spot. And that's where he was. Whether he was eating perch or not, I don't have the slightest idea. But it was right before it got into the water, ran into the river.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And a lot of reports that I get, people say that they encounter these creatures on the water or pretty close to a waterway. It almost makes me feel like the creature was fishing, especially since you said that's a really good area to fish at.
Yeah, I've caught a lot of perch in there. So that's, I mean, probably, but all I know is he was standing in knee deep water.
Yeah, it sounds like you were in shock since you couldn't move. You said that it felt like your feet were like cemented to the ground.
Yeah, my mind was screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move. I mean, I couldn't move a muscle. I had my 22 in my hand. I had my tackle box and my fishing pole in the other hand. And I was just froze there. It wasn't until when he slapped the water and that water hit me in the face is when, how you smack the water and throw a wave at somebody or, when you're out swimming and stuff. That's what it was like. But it kind of like threw a bucket of water on me with his hands. I noticed his hands were and this one wasn't big, giant, and bulky. It was tall and lanky. But I remember his arms being very long because he was in knee deep water. And when he swung that left arm across there, he scooped water up. So, I would say his hand was, went down maybe 6, 8, 10 inches, hung down below his knee because he scooped right beside his knee and just it felt like a whole bucket of water hit me. And when that water hit me, it was just kind of like that just put me, I guess, back to my senses. And that's when I dropped my tackle box and my fishing pole. Never let go of my 22. Never didn't even think about my 22 being in my hand. But buddy, I'll tell you what, I left a trail out of there in a little dust cloud. All I wanted was as far away from that rascal as I could get.
Yeah. So the creature splashed water on you?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Why do you think he did that?
Good question. I mean, I never sat and thought about why he splashed water on me, but all I knew is when that water hit me, it kind of brought me back to myself. And because he screamed first, and that just like rattled everything, even my organs, my everything kind of vibrated. It was so intense and so loud. Didn't hurt my ears. I mean, it was extremely loud, but it didn't hurt my ears. But when he screamed, and it was long, but when that water hit me, buddy, all he saw was my backside. Whatever happened to him after that, I never saw anything down in there. I would hear vocalizations every once in a while, but when I heard vocalizations, buddy, I was out of there. I ain't staying down there no more. And like I said, it took me till I was 18 years old to get over being scared of the dark. And I remember getting ridiculed so bad about that. They would tease me about being afraid of the dark, and they'd grab me up and throw me out in the dark. And I'd do everything I could to claw my way back into the house, boys and cousins knew that I was scared of the dark, but it wasn't actually that I was scared of the dark. I knew what was in the dark now.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what scared me.
Yeah, it's terrifying when you have these encounters. All of a sudden, whenever it gets dark, it terrifies you because these creatures are actually out there. And before you ever have an experience or an encounter, you're already scared of the dark, especially when you're a little kid. Like, you just have this uneasy feeling. So when you lay eyes on one of these creatures, it really changes nighttime for you.
Yeah, it's even, it affected me so bad that when I started my company, I have a company called Monster Tent, and it's here in Malvern. And I started it out west, out in New Mexico, back in the spring of '89. That I called it Monster Tent because of my encounter with that first monster that I saw. And I put the logo of, it's kind of like the Fout Monster logo as my logo in my business, but it's a little bit different. So it affected me all of my life, that first encounter. And then when I started having the encounters here, man, it was like everything just come. That first encounter here, it was like everything just kind of come back and flooded in, and all these emotions. And, you think you deal with past trauma until something triggers that trauma. And then everything comes back to you like it just happened yesterday.
I agree with that. It
And
seems like you can heal yourself, and then it just takes like one thing to trigger everything, and it all comes back, and it's
right.
much worse than before. So it's hard to heal from past wounds for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
The creature, you said it was about 8 to 10 feet tall. It looked like it had dreadlocks, or it was just more of like a mess. I interviewed a lady from
Matted
Arkansas.
hair. Yeah.
Yeah, the lady from Arkansas said she was in her pool and she looked up and saw this creature, and she described it the same way you did, except this creature, its hair was like in its face, like you couldn't see its face. And that's freaky.
I couldn't see the nose. I couldn't see the eyes. I could see the mouth. The mouth looked like it was, some of these creatures I've seen uh look kind of apish, but some of them I've seen have looked so human like, just hairy. And this one I remember his mouth was extremely large, but he had like, I wouldn't say he had buck teeth. It was more like horse teeth, big blocky teeth. When he screamed, opened his mouth and he screamed, I could see these big block teeth, and they were like, he didn't have no canines or anything, and they were like yellow and dark spots and stuff. I could see his mouth from there down, but then I never saw his eyes, never saw his nose because of that hair hung down in his face.
Yeah, that's creepy. And how close were you to this creature?
Probably no more than 15 feet.
Yeah, that's pretty close. It sounds like he was distracted and didn't know you were in the area until you both laid eyes on each other. And it almost seems like they will target certain people. You've heard the term like being marked or tagged by them. And for some reason, it doesn't matter where you go. And obviously it doesn't happen every time, but you'll have experiences every now and then. And then other people that are hunting in the area don't experience anything. It's strange.
Right. Right. I really believe that either they tag, mark. I know animals can see auras. Maybe it's an aura. I know humans have auras, and different humans have different auras. If it's an aura they pick up on, or if they tag or mark or whatever. But it just seems like throughout my life, no matter where I went to, I would end up hearing vocalizations, catching a glimpse of one or something like that. And it was like, I just saw a Bigfoot. And they're like, boy, you crazy. A lot of ridicule goes with this. That's why I've never, you're the first person I've shared publicly about my encounters, because, people look at you like you got three heads, and it's like, look, I tell them, I said, look, this creature does exist. I know for a fact, because I've laid my eyes on it. I know they're genuine. Whether they're a creature or some messed up stuff, the fallen angels, when they started doing all their DNA experiments and stuff like that, and all that stuff's true. It's not conspiracy stuff. Whether they stem from that, or whatever, I know they're real. 100%. And I tell people, well, I've spent my whole life in the woods, and I ain't never saw nothing like that. And I said, I promise you, you might not ever seen them, but they have seen you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's a lot of encounters here in Arkansas. A lot of encounters.
Yeah, it's a hot spot in North America. When this creature screamed at you, what did it sound like?
It was very, very loud. It started out kind of as like maybe a mix in a growl and a scream to a real high pitch, long, drawled out, and when it vibrated in my body, my body just cut loose, and I just, Embarrassed to say, but I wet my britches, 12-year-old kid. It literally scared the piss out of me, or the pee out of me. Nice way of saying it. But it was long, it was drawn out, and it reverberated my whole inside my body, not just the outside, but the inside. I remember inside my body was vibrating because of the pitch, and I guess the length and the power that this thing had, and I've had other ones scream at me, but the screams have been different. I've heard this type of vocalizations. That one day when I was down, when I first heard those vocalizations, it was making all different kind of noise. There at one time it sounded like samurai warriors out there talking. It was kind of like gibberish. Kind of sounded like Japanese to me. But that was long and drawn out, and it well, like I said, it really scared the pee out of me, literally.
Yeah, I understand. And I've interviewed people in the past that have peed themselves, and yeah, it does happen. I even heard people say that, Sasquatch is around because your dog will cower down and he'll pee all over himself. And yeah, that's terrifying. And
yeah,
a lot of people seem to think that these creatures are just cute and fuzzy and to leave them alone, but they don't understand, like, these things will target certain people. They're very territorial, and it's no joke. I mean, we don't go out there trying to, like, find a Sasquatch and put it in a cage. Like, a lot of times you just run into one.
Well, when I go down the woods now, I go heavy. Even when I usually I hunt with a hunting rifle and my pistol, but I now carry a 458 SOCON that I built on my chest and 40 on my hip, and then I carry another pistol as a backup. Of course, my hunting knife, it's kind of like a Bowie knife, but there's been some aggression down there. Have you ever seen a gorilla bluff charge in the zoo or on film? How they'll come up to you like on all fours, gallop at you, making noise, ape noises and stuff. I had the one that I call Big Eddie that I casted the 18-inch print probably 8 months ago. Bluff charged me like that, come out of a thicket, and he probably got within 25 yards of me, and he was, when he busted out of that thicket, it was coming through that thicket. I mean, limbs were breaking and stuff like that, and he was kind of on all fours, kind of like an ape, and screaming and hollering, making all kind of racket. And I had a 7.62 with 39 that I had on my chest, and I was like, there's no way this could have put a dent in that thing. I had a high capacity magazine in there, had my hand on my pistol, didn't raise my rifle, but I had my hand on my Glock on my side with the laser on it. And, the only thing, and that was the only time there's ever been aggression out of the ones that I've encountered down there where I hunt at. And I was talking to another researcher, and he was telling me, because I told him, I said, I found that rather odd, but it did scare me, and I did wet my britches again as a grown adult. So that's happened 3 times. Wet my britches. I mean, it's fear. I mean, it's fear. And, that's when I got back here, started going online and built that 458 SOCON. And I carry 500 grain elephant charges in that thing. They're like almost $200 for 20 rounds of these things. But I carry 2 magazines, with those special shells in there. I would never shoot one unless I would absolutely have to, and it would break my heart if I ever had to take one down. Because here's the deal. When you observe these things, they are so human-like. Facial features, mannerisms, Sometimes the way they walk is so human-like, that you really, when you first see that, is that a man in a ghillie suit, because it registers as a human. Of course, your mind tries to decipher what you're looking at, because what you're looking at, your brain can't comprehend, So that was the only bad encounter I ever had with any aggression. Every other encounter I've had has been very docile, very peaceful. They see me, I see them, I know they're there. I'll talk to them. Hey, how you doing? I'm just down here. I'm hunting. We're just going to share the woods. Definitely when I go down on the 640, I always announce myself. And the last encounter I had was earlier this year, when I was out there squirrel hunting, and that was it was last year, back in September, October. I was down there squirrel hunting, and I heard one whistle. And I kind of just stopped by this tree, and I just got real still. And I never saw it, but probably 6 minutes, 7 minutes after that, I heard another one whistle behind me. And I was like, well, it's time to get out of squirrel woods. I was almost at my limit anyway. So I felt a little uneasy. So I went ahead and called it a day on the squirrels I'd already got. But you hear stuff like that down there all the time. I mean, it's in one way, it's real cool and real fascinating, and it gets that adrenaline going and stuff. But in another, on the flip side of that coin, this is an apex predator that, from what I've researched, if you're within 100 yards of a Sasquatch, you're in their killing zone. And this thing can and will. I mean, and here's the way I look at it. It's just kind of like humans. There's some good humans and there's some bad humans. And I feel the same way with these creatures. Is there's some good ones, but there's some bad ones too. I mean, there's too many people gone missing, too many attacks, bad encounters and stuff like that. Unfortunately, I've never had a bad encounter, but that one where he bluff charged me. But they've always been pretty peaceful. You see them, they just walk off. I don't think I ever sat down at the table with them, but who knows?
Absolutely. There's good ones and bad ones. And the way I look at it is, there's good people out there and there's bad people, like you said. And also, like,
Right.
you hear a lot of people say, like, pit bulls are the sweetest dogs ever. They're so nice. Well, if you ever ran into a bad pit bull, it's pretty scary.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, imagine what a pit bull could do to a little kid. Yeah, they're sweet. They're good dogs if they're trained right. But depending on how they were raised, they could tear you apart. I mean, you could lose your life, your face, and it's happened.
Mm-hmm.
People have pit bulls and they think, oh, this is such a good dog. And one day things go wrong. And, it's the same way with these creatures. They could easily turn on you. And can you imagine what's something that could pull a full-size pine tree out of the ground, just deroot it like a pencil?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it could just tear you apart so easy. So the fact they let us walk away, that really says a lot. And they're really human-like. You can tell there's deep intelligence going on within their mind.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And the creature that you encountered in Arizona, that's terrifying, because it screamed and it sounded like a lightning bolt just went through your body. You also heard whoops whenever you were turkey hunting. How big do you think this creature was, the silver one?
The silver one, and it was in New Mexico.
New Mexico,
Arizona.
sorry.
That was, if I had to estimate, and I'm not good at estimating, I would have to say he was at least 8+. 8+, at least. I mean, that one was the typical, just big, bulky, huge. It looked like a linebacker for the 49ers, just huge. And the, and I was looking at it when I was looking at the scope, when its foot hit the ground, you could see the muscles just ripple through his legs, through his hair. And, but he was a brick house. He was solid, just huge, massive thing.
Yeah, that's terrifying. And let's see what else. Do you feel like the game feeder brought these creatures in? Do you think that's what it was doing whenever you saw those eyes looking around the big pine tree?
I don't know if it was the game feeder. I've never found any tracks close to the game feeder, but here's my thinking on that. That game feeder attracts other animals, and we've got an extremely large hog population and deer population down there as well. So there's an abundance food source, you know, and I feel that, you know, the predator instincts, you know, if I can get around a food source, it's just like us, you know, we set up a game camera or a game feeder. We're predators setting up in that tree or in that blind, you know, and we're just waiting for that right one to come by that we can easily pluck out of there with a rifle, muzzleloader, or a bow. I feel that it was attracted there by what was coming into the feeder itself. I don't think it was ever eating my corn. Now my brother did have one, and I think it was a squatch. I mean, it literally destroyed his feeder. You know, he didn't get anything on camera, but it destroyed that feeder. And the thing that I found interesting is the lid to that. It has a twist off lid on top. The lid I found probably 30, 40 yards inside the wood line. So I don't know if it carried the lid over there, but it just totally destroyed this feeder. And he's like, what the heck happened here? What did this? You know, and I'm thinking in my mind, you ain't gonna believe me if I told you.
Yeah,
so I think
absolutely.
it was after what was coming into the feeder.
Yeah, it makes sense. And they're looking for an easy meal. What color was the eye shine?
The eye shine was like kind of like a yellowish green
Yeah.
type is what it was. Even the eye shines that I see, of course, the ones that I see, the ones where I had those 5 that were around me, they're hitting them with that red light, makes their eyes look just a little bit different. You know, I've heard people say that they've seen like blue eye shines and stuff like that. But they were kind of a reddish looking eye. Of course, I was shooting a red light at them when I had 5 of them around me, but you know, and they all sounded like they were calling to each other, sounding like hoot owls, but you could tell it was too dang big to be a hoot owl. And a hoot owl's going to be up in the top of the tree, not 8, 10, 12, 15 feet off the ground, and probably not 5 of them, 3 on one side of the river, 2 on the other side of the river. And they definitely ain't going to have eyes that big. So I feel there's at least 5 down there, maybe a clan. You know, I'm sure the 14-inch tracks that I got pictures of, I figured it was a juvenile. The ones that were throwing rocks at me, I've heard the juveniles are pretty much jokesters. They'll do most of the, you know, throwing stuff at you and whatnot.
Yeah. The Sasquatch that I hit with the spotlight, their eyes were like a yellowish green color as well. But I've also heard reports from other people where they're like a gold color, red, and
Right.
like you said,
Red,
blue.
yeah.
So I don't think there's just one distinct color that
Much
says
like
that's
us,
a
you know,
Sasquatch.
our eyes are different. But, you know, when you've got you know, almost a baseball sized pair of eyes, you know, that you can distinctively see, you know, and you can distinctly see them blink their eyes, you know, that's not a, you know, 500-pound coon over there on the side of that tree.
Yeah. Were they self illuminated or was there like a light being casted on the eyes?
No, I've never seen one where, you know, and I've heard stories of you could see the eyes, they were red and stuff like that. All of mine, the eyes that eye shines that I have seen have been, due to me shining lights toward their way. I've never seen any glow in the dark eyes. I've heard a lot of reports of that, and eyewitness reports and stuff like that, but I've never ever, it was always reflecting back at whatever I was shining at them.
Yeah. And the tree breaks that you found where it was fresh greens, they broke the tops and put it in the middle of the road or the trail. Why do you think they did that?
The only thing I can think of, maybe a territorial, hey, this is my area, don't come down this road, because I've heard them doing that, eyewitness reports of Squatches, putting logs and stuff or tree breaks across roads to kind of say, the only thing, all I can do is speculate. That's the only thing everybody can do is speculate. We don't know for sure yet. I think is time progresses on, possibly we'll know solid, but here's my thinking, there's too many eyewitnesses to say, for somebody to think, it's kind of like, I love my God. And I remember a guy in my church arguing with me when we started talking about Sasquatch and stuff, you ain't never saw no, and I asked him, I said, do you believe in God? He said, well, of course I do. I said, have you ever seen him? Well, no. I said, how can you say that about Sasquatch? Just because you haven't seen him doesn't mean that he doesn't exist.
Yeah.
God does exist.
Absolutely. Once you have an encounter, you'll never go back. And,
oh no,
it's hard to have an encounter with God, but it does happen. Like people do. Yeah. I've had some strange experiences. I didn't see God, but like moments in my life where I cried out to God for help and then boom, like something happened, like a miracle. It's like, you can't deny that.
Right. Yeah. God has made himself very tangible to me. January 16th of 2000 when Jesus came crashing into my life and changed my life forever. It's been a little over 25 years ago. And I'm still walking. Had my struggles, had my dark moments that I've went through. My walk hadn't been perfect, but I'm still in the game. Still telling people about Jesus, still following him and trying to do the best I can do. That way, when I see him face to face, I pondered a question, just a little off course. I pondered a question a while back. What would I do when I see Jesus face to face? What will I say? It's kind of like that one song. Will I dance before Jesus? Will I follow my face? Open the eyes of my heart, Lord. I can't remember what that song is. But they made a movie out of it. But, I pondered a couple of questions. Did I get it right, Jesus? And was I even close? That's a tough question, or a tough statement. I've tried to do the best I can in my Christian walk. I fall short and I've got my issues and stuff. Ask my last ex-wife. She'll tell you how many issues I got. Didn't want a divorce, but that's the direction she chose. And I hated that because we loved hunting together. And she get boogered up by these creatures, but I wish her well. But I've had a lifetime of experience with these things, with these creatures, and I've enjoyed every experience. And I pray I never have a bad experience. But I promise you, I don't care if you're a heathen or you're born again. When you get in a close proximity of these creatures, you will pray. I promise you, you will pray, whether you know the good Lord or not.
Yeah, that's very true. And yeah, it's amazing you had these experiences that strengthen your faith. The creature that you encountered in the ground blind, you said it was 12 inches from your face and then it screamed. What did it look like? Did
Mhm.
you see the face?
I saw the face on that one. That one more looked like, it had big, huge black eyes. The nose was flat. Uh, and it had like the one that I saw when I was 12. It had like big, blocky, looked like horse teeth. It's probably the best I can explain. It didn't have long hair like the first one I encountered, but it did have hair on its head and on its face. But like real close around his eyes. There wasn't a whole bunch of hair there. There wasn't a lot of hair on his nose. There was a little bit of hair on his nose and around his lips and stuff. There wasn't a whole lot of hair there, but he did have hair on his face. And his hair was probably because he was leaning over sideways looking at me, and it was probably 3-4 inch hair on the side of his head that was kind of hanging down just a little bit. And he wasn't a dirty one either, like the first one I saw. He looked pretty clean, but it was just a flash of a second, just like an imprint, like a flash bulb in the dark. And he was gone. And I tried to tried to run through that ground blind. If it was possible to run through that ground blind, I'd have run through that ground blind. This scared the fire out of me. But it scared him too. He screamed, I screamed, and he went his way, and I tried to go my. I mean, I ripped the whole side of my blind up trying to run through that cotton picking thing. Scared the fire out of me.
Yeah, I can't imagine how terrifying it was when you laid eyes on this creature, knowing how close it was, and then it tore off through the woods and you could hear it. I mean, just the fact that it screamed in your face, that's just scary, man. I can't imagine the fear that you
I,
felt.
yeah, I knew he was there. I felt it in my body that, you know, this thing is out there, but I never in a minute. I was trying to peek around the corner and catch when the lightning struck. I figured, I knew there was one there. I didn't realize how close he was. I figured because when I heard that stick pop, that was probably maybe 10 yards from my blind. So I actually thought I would see a silhouette when I looked around, trying to look behind my blind. I didn't want to open. And all I had to do is undo two things and flap that down, and there's no camouflage there, so it'd just been an open window because that's a place that you can shoot your bow through. I didn't want to look through there, and be expose myself, but I knew in the camo that they couldn't see in. But when I looked around there and that lightning flashed, he was just about as surprised as I was, and he was. I don't know if he was as scared as I was. But I mean, he did turn tail and go the other way when I screamed. It sounded like a bulldozer going through the woods.
Yeah,
So
I've heard it
crazy.
before. I mean, these things just tear through the woods. I always describe it as someone putting a truck in neutral and letting it roll through the woods, and you can just hear
Right.
trees and limbs just snapping and popping as this thing's
Yeah.
moving through the woods. And the one I heard, it like zigzagged through the woods. And basically, what happened, I had some
Wow.
experiences
Wow.
on the river. I called them in. They pushed over a tree. One
Mm.
screamed at me that night. So when I got
Uh-huh.
home, I live like 5 minutes from the Merrimack River here in Missouri. I was doing that
Mhm.
same call again, trying to replicate it. Like, what the heck? What was that
Right.
came in that night? And all of a sudden, it was almost before dark, and I did that same whoop call, and this thing came
Uh-huh.
tearing through the woods. It was zigzagging, making its way
Wow.
towards me, and you could just hear limbs and trees just snapping as it made its way towards me.
Right.
And right when it got dark, it like stopped at the edge of the wood line, probably like 20, 30 yards in the woods, and it just stopped and everything
Right.
got quiet. But man, that was spooky.
Hmm.
People say you can't call these things
Yeah.
in. People that would
Uh,
knock and call are morons, but it's worked for me. Now it doesn't now, but
yeah.
I don't know why. Maybe they know my call, but yeah, that was
Right.
terrifying.
Yeah. The wood knocks, I'd stop logging those because there's so many down there, and that's just a limb breaking or something like that. It's like, dude, that's wood to wood. That is somebody or something knocking the fire I mean, it's too loud. It's too powerful to be just a limb hitting the ground or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like you've had a lot of activity down there, and you heard whooping by the beaver pond, and it was making crazy
Mhm.
sounds. What other kind of sounds did you hear by the beaver pond?
Down by the beaver pond, it was, you know, I could, you can hear the sounds, but to be able to make a noise like that, I don't, my brain and my mouth don't work that way, but I knew the first sound that I heard, it brought me all the way to where I was 12 years old. I mean, it just went right through my body. I knew exactly what it was, and it was instant fear, and it just kept going on. And why I didn't reach down and get my cotton picking phone and record this thing, I guess I was just in shock, literally, on this encounter here. But and then one time, like I said, it sounded like samurai warriors. You know, kind of like that. It's probably about the best. And it was different as it walked down that creek back there behind me, probably 50 yards. It was probably about 50 yards from me, and I mean, it was just wild. It was just wild. But it sounded like two Japanese samurai warriors, or I think samurai. I think they're Japanese, is what it sounded like. But it didn't start out that way. But it ended up making it was whoop, and then like whoop, real loud, or the huffing. This one didn't huff, but I've heard like it's just it's their sounds that they make are extremely hard for I think for any human to emulate or try to mimic. I mean, I can imagine the size of the lungs, the power that these things have to make the noise that they make. Because it's been more than once that I'd hear these noises and it would vibrate inside you at the power of these things when they do make. I've never had nothing. When they whoop, I've never had them. None of that vibrating. When they scream and them huffs, it'll make the hair on the back of your neck stand up every cotton picking time.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's amazing to experience this type of activity and encounter them, but it's also like, I don't know, it's like a blessing and a curse. So I am sorry that you've had to deal with
It
this your
is.
whole life. And even with things in our regular life, we just can't understand why they happen, and we're left wondering why, and we never get an answer. And when you experience something like this, it really leaves you questioning, and it's just like you got to live with it, and you never really get an answer. It's good to know there's other people out there that have had experiences and they've encountered them, but you just know that there's others. It still doesn't answer the questions that you have, like, why did this happen to me? And it
Right.
just proves that
Right.
there's things on this planet that we don't understand. There's unknown creatures on this planet that have not been discovered. Or, if you
Mhm.
look at it from a
I
spiritual
agree
point
with
of
that.
view, there's a purpose behind all of this. Nothing just happens out of luck. Like, there's a design to it all. And, if there's a spiritual
Yeah.
purpose behind it, maybe it shows God's glory, because it proves that the Nephilim were here and everything
Right.
God said is true. And basically,
Mhm.
we are living in the end of times, possibly. And it's just like Noah's
Well, I
time.
believe that.
Yeah.
Right. There's no quinky dinks in God's word. There's no quinky dinks in God's Bible. His word is true. The Nephilims were here. I've heard people talk about, portals and seeing them go through portals, being able to cloak. I've never seen anything like that. I've seen some pretty convincing videos on that, but I have to think back to, sometimes in the Bible, you have to go out of the Bible to understand the Bible. You have to go to the writings of Josephus and stuff like that. But what I found very interesting is Jesus spoke about a cat in the Bible, and he only has a brief little deal, but it says Enoch walked with God and was no more. And then when Jesus in the New Testament referred back to the book of Enoch, well, that piqued my interest. So I had to go to the book of Enoch and figure out who this guy was. And that's outside of the Bible to understand what Jesus was talking about. And, the book of Enoch was originally in the Bible, but, scholars decided to take some of the books out. I think the original Bible had 80 books in it, compiled of stories and whatnot. Now, some of them are pretty far out there, but in the book of Enoch, it talks about, portals that he went into other dimensions and stuff like that, So when it comes to these creatures, I'm very open-minded on people, when they tell me their encounters and what happened to them. They take me out, show me stuff where it happened and stuff like that. So I don't denounce, and you can tell when somebody's genuinely, has had an encounter that has really affected their lives, because like you said earlier, they're marked by that. They're marked by that, whether it was a peaceful encounter or not a peaceful encounter. I believe my first one was a peaceful encounter, but yet that traumatized me as a kid. And I've carried that up through my adulthood, and it just kind of laid there dormant for years until, bam, once I heard that noise, from that one back there by the beaver pond, it all triggered all that stuff back in 74, 75 when I had that first encounter. So I'm very open-minded to the fact that I know these creatures exist, and that's what I call them. I call them creatures. I'm not for sure if they're, half man, half ape. Are they from the Nephilims? Were they created from the Watchers? Were they dimensional beings? I haven't seen it myself, but if somebody says that they've seen stuff like that, I'm not going to make fun of them. They had an encounter of something that I haven't had. It's kind of like me and you. You can read a scripture and come up with a whole different interpretation than what God speaks to me in that scripture. So why should I throw a rock at somebody over here because they've seen one walk through a portal and I haven't? So I don't dismiss that at all because it's in the book of Enoch and whatnot. So it says that they and you have to look at all the hieroglyphics of things that have been buried for centuries, and you see a half man, half bird. I think I think the Watchers done some jacked up stuff, before the flood, and the Bible calls them men of renown. These are a giants, Goliath and all his brothers. So there was giants that lived and thrived here on this planet. Why can't we believe that there's still giants? They just carry a little bit more hair than we have today. It's crazy, and you can jump in that rabbit hole and go a long ways with all this stuff.
Yeah,
But,
absolutely. But it does
fascinated.
point towards what's happening today. So it may be another rabbit
Yeah.
hole, but there's not very many answers out there. And it seems like the people in the Bible or just history in general, they've lived through this life. They know
Right.
what was here and what's happening, and they went through the same struggles that we go through today. So they weren't stupid back then.
Right. No, not at all. Not at all. Not at all.
Yeah.
I find it with myself, I consider myself very fortunate to have the encounters that I have had. It's been educational. It's been scary at times. It's been traumatizing at times. If you can if something can make a grown man wet his britches, that's trauma. But, I didn't get hurt. Thought I was going to get hurt, but, all in all, it was a peaceful encounter, scary sometimes, but I still consider myself, I find these creatures very fascinating, and I want to know more about them. It can become an overwhelming addiction, big time, as you know, this is what you do now because of your encounters. And I'm praying early, sometime in the near future, I can start doing more, going out and just, going on Bigfoot expeditions and stuff, because they're everywhere. They're everywhere. You just got to know what to look for.
Absolutely. Maybe we can meet up sometime and go camping if you're up for it.
Oh, would love that. Now my camping is my RV. I've seen your tent and stuff like that. I'm cool with that if that's the way you want to go. But I'll take my RV. We can set it up somewhere in the woods, and I prefer to go that way. But if you want to do a tent, I would really like to hook up with you. Maybe come down here on this hunting lease of mine and show you around and whatnot. Or if you got something set up in the future, I'd love to tag along.
Okay.
And come in and set some stuff up and do a production with you and go out and do some looking around and stuff. Heck yeah.
Okay. Let's do that for sure. Make sure that you message me. I get tied up with so many people contacting me. And I'm like, oh man, who was that guy? Because I got like so many Daves and Davids in my phone. So just make sure that you keep in contact, and we'll make it happen for sure. Because that's not too far away from me.
Right. Well, they call me Super Dave from a fight I got into in high school. But in my MC world, they tagged me with Sasquatch, because I always talked about Bigfoot, and they thought I was crazy. Of course, I was a big muscle, long-haired guy, drove a Harley, so they tagged me with Sasquatch. So Super Dave, a.k.a. Sasquatch, is what most people know me of. But you can put me in the phone anyways. But yeah, let's get in touch with each other, man, and set something up and go do something. I'm all about it.
Okay. Yeah, just let me know and we'll make it happen for sure. There was an area that you found tracks in several areas, but you mentioned this lake where it screamed across the lake. Now, that scream sounded different than the other ones that you heard, like in New Mexico and at the tent.
Yeah, of course, the screams, it's just kind of like me screaming and you screaming. It's not going to be the same scream, but yet it's a scream, hands down. And that one, we were just kind of going along the edge of Lake, right, Patman Lake down there in Texas this last weekend. And we were just kind of sitting on this log. We went down to the edge to see if, now this is where Steamboat said he saw a 15-footer Sasquatch down there. And he says he mind speaks with them and stuff, which I find very fascinating. But I think was it Samson? He called this one. He had names for him, but we went down in that area there where he saw that 15-foot Sasquatch. We're going down the edge of the lake and whatnot. I was trying to find some tracks. I ordered in some more dental material. And the material I use is what dentists use to cast your teeth, because you can get like ridges in their feet and stuff. This stuff is phenomenal to cast Bigfoot tracks with. And it's a lot harder. It don't break as easy as plaster or Paris. But so we was going down there looking for tracks and stuff, because I wanted to cast some tracks and stuff. And we were just sitting here on this log, and we were just kind of talking back and forth. And then all of a sudden, across from the lake, here the sucker shot off, man. And it was a very loud, long, drawled out, there's no way a human could produce that long. I don't care if they're an opera singer. They can't go that. It was long and loud. And this thing was probably, 300 to 500 yards from us. But it was very distinctive, very long, high-pitched vocal. Kind of started out low, went to high, and then started fading out. And by the time it got almost done with that scream, every coyote on that side of the lake just fired off and started yelping. I got that, but I may have got the end of the scream. I don't know. I have to go back there and listen to the audio. But time I got my iPhone out, I was like, oh man, I just missed that. And it was very unique, very interesting scream. But it dang sure wasn't a human. Yeah. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. That's terrifying. Whenever you were fishing and you woke up, I think you said you were face down by the chair. What do you think happened, and do you believe that possibly these creatures had something to do with it? Because I think you mentioned experiencing some activity before that happened.
Yeah, I did experience some activity before that happened. I knew they were there. My dog alerted me to let me know that they were there. So I know they were there. There was the pebbles that dropped in the water. There was the tree that shook that day, and you know, I don't know about the whole infrasound type stuff. Now I have been like when we were out uh, this last weekend. I had kind of a spell, and I just got all of a sudden and I'm a pretty healthy person. I keep myself. I go to the gym, uh, and I stay fit and take a lot of vitamins. I try to take care of myself as I continue to age. And all of a sudden, I got real quizzy, real dizzy, broke out in a cold sweat. I mean, it was so bad I had to go and lay down, and they come got me and said, "Hey, man, there's something throwing limbs into the camp." So I got up for a little bit and I almost fell over again. I was like, "Guys, y'all let me know what happened in the morning. I got to lay down." But if they, there's possibility, because I can't remember anything. All I remember was sitting in my chair. I knew these things were around us. And the next thing I knew, and there's a loss of time there. You know, uh, I know when this took place, it was probably maybe around midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. Uh, uh, and next thing I know, I woke up the next morning. Whether it was whether they hit me, I don't remember feeling quizzy or anything like that. And I have never been known to just pass out ever in my life. But I woke up with mud caked on the side of my face, laying on that. I remember getting up, and but I don't remember gathering up my stuff. I don't remember driving, and I'm probably 3 miles, 4 miles from the camp. I don't remember driving back to camp. I don't remember anything. I mean, it's just all a blur. It's just like a blank time and space that I don't remember nothing, of what took place, how long I was laying there on the ground. It was real freaky. It's just like everything just went black and that was it until I woke up the next morning. So whether that was infrasound or anything like that, I've heard people saying, it made them feel real quizzy. They wanted to pass out. They had to go sit down. Uh, I don't know, but it was. I know them things were around because I caught the eye shines. My dog let me know they were there. The next thing I remember, I'm in camp with all my stuff loaded up, and I don't remember anything about packing my stuff up or even what time I left or anything like that. I woke up the next morning, I felt fine, got up, got the mud off my face, changed my sheets on the RV, made me some breakfast, drunk some coffee, and then I hauled butt right back down there to see, if I'd left anything or if there was any tracks or anything like that. But there was no tracks that I could find, but I definitely knew they were there.
Yeah, that would be the only explanation that I would have is infrasound, and possibly they disoriented you and you passed out. I mean, I don't have another explanation as to what could have taken place there. And it's kind of scary because it's like, did they take you somewhere and then bring you back? It
Right.
makes you wonder.
Yeah. I was still fully clothed, had my, my knife was still in my boot. I carry a very large knife. My gun was still on my hip. Of course, they had mud all over it. And I couldn't tell you what happened. But the only thing I can tell you about that, it did happen. So where did they scoop me up, took me some other place? And I have, a lot of people have encounters where they see little balls of light and stuff. I've seen that quite a bit down there. Of course, Gert and Now, I'm not in all these encounters don't take place in Gurdon. I'll share with you off camera about where they're at. But they have the Gurdon lights down there, to where there's balls of lights that you can see when you go down the railroad tracks in a certain place. But it's known for the Gurdon lights, is what they call it. But you can see those, some of the encounters that I have had, I've seen orbs and stuff like that down there. So it's just all kind of weird, but it's all kind of fascinating too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned the orbs, because that's a crucial piece of evidence to these experiences. And I believe it's tied in with the activity. I've heard of the Dover lights in Arkansas, and yeah, that's incredible to know there's another area where people are seeing lights. And I don't think there's any just specific areas, but there's some places where people see them more. But you can see the lights anywhere in the forest, and it's mysterious. It seems like there's an intelligence behind it, and there's a spooky feeling to it all. And yeah, it makes me feel like it's tied in with Sasquatch. Many people have mentioned those are the portals, or it's Sasquatch like manipulating energy, and I think it very well could be.
Yeah, well, it's not normal. Not something that you see in the woods every day, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And whenever I encountered the orbs, I was having Sasquatch activity. So that's what makes me believe it's tied in. And I've also heard many reports and have taken many reports where people see a Sasquatch and it turns into a ball of light, or they're having Sasquatch activity and they see these strange orbs floating around.
Right.
Yeah.
I haven't saw the orbs a whole lot, but I have seen them.
Yeah, they are out there. And what do you feel? What do you think the message is with the arches that you found? And you mentioned teepees. Do you think it's a warning? Do you think like they live in these things? What are your thoughts about it?
Well, a couple of things. Could it be marking their territory? Because I find it was like this weekend we went out. We found a lot of arches, and we found structures made with pine trees and stuff that, some of them we picked up from the bottom. There's no broken trees around there. We pick them up from the bottom. There's no root system on these trees. They have been brought there and stacked. And there was a lot of arches that were, they were intertwined with each other and stuff down there this last weekend. I've got a bunch of pictures and some videos on stuff like that. Whether it's a territorial type thing or, I'm sure as human-like as these creatures are, I think they get bored. Like, oh, okay, let's do something. That could be another option there. That sometimes I think about. Well, maybe it's bored. It's going to just do this, but it's. I remember seeing stuff like that down there when I was a kid. I remember seeing stuff like that in New Mexico, and especially here over in Texas. There was this one set of woods that was just like, wow, this is so cool. And that's where we found that one track at. But it was so piney, you couldn't see any tracks because of the leaves and the pine this time of the year on the ground and whatnot. I was real disappointed. I was really wanting to cast a track. But that one that was in the water, I'd have to drain that whole area and let it dry out a little bit before I could even cast it, so I didn't get the cast in.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have any other experiences that you forgot about? Anything else that you'd like to share?
No, I guess that's about. I mean, I've had some, minute things happen, throwing stuff at me. From where I hunt at down there, it's just kind of like become a norm now. The big things that I have, I log in with the tree breaks and the whistles and the fake bird calls and the fake hoot owls. I just, I stopped logging those because it happened so much. Yeah. And then I went through my wife left and went through a divorce. So the last couple of years, year and a half, I haven't spent as much time because, I was going through a whole lot, real dark time in my life. So I haven't spent as much time as I've dedicated this year. This year, it's like, no, I'm going back to the woods. And so I've had just a few little things happen. So we're actually going down this weekend. We're going to spend 3 days down there right in a hot spot. And we're going to fish, stay out on this big pond. It's in the middle of this big cypress swamp. We're going to do some fishing. They said it was a good fishing down there. So we're going to spend 3 days down there. So I'm going to do some calling, some wood knocks, some whoops and stuff, and see what I can hear or find. Now, I'm going to have some family with me, so maybe I'll have some witnesses, to these encounters.
Absolutely. It's good to have people around just in case something goes down, and it's kind of nice when someone else
Right.
experiences the activity. One last question I have before we wrap up the
Yes, sir.
podcast. Were you going through an illness, or were you experiencing paranormal activity throughout this span of time when you had these encounters and experiences with Bigfoot?
That first encounter that I had, I said it wasn't safe for me to be in the house. There was a lot of mental and physical abuse within that household, not from my dad, but through who he was married to. So it was a pretty dramatic time is when I saw that first one. Now, as far as I've been a pretty healthy person all my life, so I don't think there was any sickness that had to do with it or anything like that. I think everything was going fairly normal in my life on all my encounters. There wasn't any drama time or anything like that going on in my life. Of course, usually when stuff like that happens, I just kind of isolate from everybody. It's a bad habit of mine. But
Yeah, I do the same thing. And yeah, it was just a question that I had because possibly these creatures are able to pick up on people's illnesses or their energy, like you mentioned earlier in the podcast.
right, yeah, with different auras and stuff like that. I find that very plausible.
Yeah.
Because what is it, lions or tigers? They can send out infrasound as well and kind of paralyze animals for a little while. Now I know that's documented, but I believe they can pick up on our auras because I think every person does have an aura. We give off a certain type of energy, and I think these creatures pick up on that. I believe they can tell if you're going to be a harm to them or not.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And now I talk to them. When I'm in the woods. I'm not here to hurt you. We can share the land. Wouldn't mind hearing a whoop or some vocalizations or see a sighting as long as it's peaceful. So I talk to these rascals. Whether they're there or not, I'm going to go ahead and speak and tell them, why I'm down here and whatnot, because in all actuality, I'm in their house.
Yeah, without a doubt. And science has proven that animals can see auras, and you hear that a lot from people that ride horses. They say, now, if you're fearful or you're anxious, that horse is going to be able to pick up on it, and he's going to feed off of it, and it's going to make him nervous.
Yeah. That's true right there.
Yeah. That's same true with dogs too. If you go into someone's house and you're up to no good, that dog's going to sense that. He's going to pick up on it.
Sense that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know after I had just bought, Christian had passed, my other German Shepherds, I bought 2 German Shepherd females that were about 8 weeks old. And then probably they were almost a year when my wife left. And the sadness that I had, my dogs picked up on it. They'd come over there and put their heads in my lap. It was kind of like they were not suffering, but they could just pick up on the sadness. So they were like sadness with me, and they would, even the cat that was hers, started clinging to me, through that hard time and whatnot. I found that very fascinating. That my dogs would pick up on sadness and come try to comfort me. Because I believe a dog, God made dogs for humans. because if you ever want to see the unconditional love of God, look at a dog. Look at a dog. It doesn't matter, if you scream at it or anything like. You come home, they're happy to see, they're quick to forgive, and they pick up on your emotions. If you're happy, they're happy. If you're sad, they're sad, and dog spelled backwards is God.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you there. And I got a lot to think about after this interview. I'm going out to the woods in an area that has had a lot of encounters and experiences. And
wow.
I told you before we talked that we casted a track out there. So I'm going to be thinking about everything we talked about when I'm out there, man. Look what you did.
Yeah, man. Every time I have a sighting or somebody comes by the shop and says, "Hey, man, there's quite a few sightings around here at Malvern people don't even know about, And I said, let's go out there and look, tell me your story. What'd you see? What happened here? What happened here? Where'd it cross at right here, So I find these creatures very, very fascinating. Very fascinating.
Yeah, me too. All right, Dave, I appreciate your time. Let me know in the future when you want to get together, and
you bet.
We'll go out there exploring, camping, and filming, and we'll see what we can come up with.
Love to. I appreciate you taking your time to hear me out.
Yeah, I appreciate you too, and I'm very thankful that you took time off of work to speak with me today and to share your experiences openly with everyone here on the channel. And I know the people that are listening really appreciated these experiences because you can just tell they're authentic and you really experienced these Sasquatch creatures, and I have no doubt about that.
Yeah, they're real. If anybody out there is a skeptic, go out and spend some time in the woods. Just act normal. Don't go out there looking for them. Just go out there and act normal. When I started encountering them on the river, I just went out there, played my music, and just kind of kick back. See a few bald eagles, catch some fish. Get off to myself and just kind of enjoy nature. Just kind of be able to unwind. No pressures, no phone calls, no business, no ministry or anything like that, and just kind of kick back on my own time. Talk. Gives me a time to reflect, with my God, and these creatures just show up. They do love Southern rock music, by the way. So play a little Southern rock music and see what happens, see if you can get one to come in.
Yeah, absolutely. They're attracted to music, the sounds of people talking, and they're very curious by nature.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. All right, Dave. Well, I appreciate everything. And if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me a message. Be sure to keep in contact. And I'm sure you're going to think of more things that have taken place after we get off the phone, but hopefully we get to talk again in the future.
There you go. God bless you, my friend.
Yep. God bless, and you take care.
All right, man.
All right. Bye. All right, Dave, thank you again for sharing your Bigfoot encounters and experiences from the state of Arkansas and New Mexico. I can only imagine how you felt when you encountered this creature in the water. When it splashed water on you, I think it was a sign of aggression, and it was being very territorial. It was showing you who is the boss around the area. I've heard of the Sasquatch in Arkansas having really messy hair, kind of like dreadlocks, and it's kind of scary to think that these creatures have different looks to them, and there's just not one species or one type. So, waking up with your face in the mud, it makes me wonder what happened, and if you guys have any suggestions as to what could have happened to Dave, please let me know in the comments down below. I would like to visit Dave and check out the area, and maybe it's a possibility in the future. If you have a Bigfoot encounter that you would like to share, please contact me sometime. It's alright if you've already been on other channels or podcasts. I would like to hear about it, and it just helps me out with the research because I never know if I'm going to go to the area and I can look back on that encounter and say, hey, this is what happened to this person in this area, so let's go look here. Also, if you guys can, please support the channel in any way possible. You can donate to the PayPal or use the thanks button and make a donation through YouTube. All right, that's all we have for today. And until the next one, be safe out there in the forest.